And when you check your fuel pressure, you're probably going to have to take your breather assembly off because it's very tight up underneath here. But when you take your breather assembly off, you'll have to unplug this rear vacuum port for the 𝐼𝐼𝐼 system, and that's going to have to be capped off right here. You'll just have to buy a little rubber cap and make your own, however you want to go about doing that. Or otherwise you won't get a good reading, mainly because the pressure regulator has a diaphragm in it that relies on fuel injector pressure and air cleaner pressure to operate properly. So if this nipple is not plugged off when you unplug your 𝐼𝐼𝐼, you won't get a good reading. You can go down to the store, and the auto parts store, and buy a little package of these rubber fittings for running vacuum tests. This is a cap that I use for the 𝐼𝐼𝐼 vacuum port on the back of the rear throttle body. I keep it handy because actually, if you're going to run tests on your car without your 𝐼𝐼𝐼 breather assembly on, you need to plug off that vacuum port. And the reason is you're really going to get it's designed to work with the 𝐼𝐼𝐼 intact. You're going to get some vacuum going on back. You could have an actual backfire. It'll blow fire right up out of the throttle bodies. Just giving you a word of caution. But hang on to this. Put it in a safe place. This should be running about 12 psi. It's about between 9 and 13 psi. It's running right at 12 psi. But if you check the fuel pressure on your Crossfire, you should check the fuel pressure according to the factory service manual on the crossover tube between the two throttle bodies. Factory service manual, section 6E226. Fuel pressure test point. Front injector, rear injector. That's the crossover tube. Shows the test point in the center. This front throttle body has a compensator in it that compensates for lack of fuel pressure for the fuel traveling over to the rear throttle body. And then this rear throttle body has a pressure regulator in it because you're always going to get more fuel pumped up to the throttle bodies than the actual throttle the engine needs. So the pressure regulator here will send the excess fuel back to the fuel tank through this 5/16 inch return line right here. But the factory service manual calls for the fuel pressure test to be between the two throttle bodies, and that's the reason why you might be getting 12, 13 pounds delivered up to the front throttle body, but that doesn't mean you're going to be getting it over to the second one. Could have a problem with your compensator. One thing to keep in mind when you're working with the fuel pressure on a Crossfire injection engine, you've got a pressure compensator on the front throttle body, and then you got a pressure regulator on the rear throttle body that are trying to maintain fuel pressure between 9 and 13 psi. The problem on the Crossfire is if you're below 9 psi, you're going to have, as it says in the factory service manual, you're going to have poor performance. If it's too high, you're going to have detonation and excessive odor. You don't have a lot of room to work with. It's somewhere between 9 and 13 psi. The factory service manual says the vehicle will run on 9 psi, but I kind of hesitate on that. I would think probably it might run on 9 psi if it were brand new and everything was working exactly as it was designed to work. But when older like it is, I doubt 9 psi would do very good at all. It might run, but it's not going to be drivable. Another thing to keep in mind when you run your pressure test is your battery voltage, because the fuel injectors do not control the amount of fuel that they're bursting. The electronic control module controls the amount of fuel, and the electronic control module is looking for a reference voltage. So if it isn't seeing what it needs to see, it will compensate for it, but it's going to struggle. According to the factory service manual, when battery voltage is low, the ECM can compensate for weak spark to the distributor, but it will increase the amount of fuel, increase the idle, and increase the dwell time